Sean,
Hey, how are you, Andy?
good. I'm just reading about the Chinese want to build a Nicaraguan canal that would be the biggest infrastructure project of all time.
Well, you know what? It's becoming obvious to me, and I bet it's become obvious to you, that there are nation states on this planet that still care about people. And I don't know that ours, at least our government and the officials that are in charge of our government, care very darn much about people anymore. And I think that's really at the root of the problem.
Yes, yes, it is. Also, the Chinese have an unbelievable amount of cash to spend before becomes worthless. So, why not build that and become like the kings of that region? So,
Well,
makes sense.
yeah, and you know what? I think we can just jump right in and keep this conversation going. We've not spoken now in 6 weeks. My bad. We usually try to touch base every 4 weeks. And I think that this soundbite that I want to play for you from analyst Dirk Edresens of the Brussels Tribunal will
Okay.
speak volumes based on what we were just talking about, which is the people in control of our government in this country have long ago stopped caring about humanity, and now we've become a nation of war. Listen to this.
The American economy is already a war economy, and they need to produce arms. And these arms are going to kill people and destroy whole countries in the near future. And they are already busy doing so. So instead of using money to destroy the planet, why don't they use their money to reconstruct, to provide health care, to provide fresh water, to provide education to the whole world? So this country, the United States, is a rogue state, is a rogue state, and I think that the United States is busy destroying the whole world. So if the world doesn't wake up, it's going to continue, and it will end up in a third world war.
Now, it's apropos that our conversation, Andy, started the way that it did there because, again, you and I haven't spoken in 6 weeks, and we're so in sync. I was just reading your latest, Is It Really Ukraine? And again, we're completely on the same page. I don't want to jump in and steal your thunder yet. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. And, per the comment you just played, you can go all the way back to Eisenhower, warning of the military industrial complex. Of course, back in the 50s and 60s, the United States was the dominant global superpower and still had reasonably good intentions. But now when you read David Stockman talking about how because of all the lobbying and all the misallocation, we become as he calls it, a warfare state. Our biggest businesses now, when you see durable goods orders or factory orders, and anytime you see them up, it's always because they're being led by government-funded industries such as the military, and they need things to do. And forget their agendas. Obviously, their agendas, but it's literally one of the largest businesses in America is war, and they just can't fire people, so they got to do something.
Yeah, and meanwhile, I think Microsoft just announced that they're laying off, what, 18,000 people? So even the industries, the technology leadership industries, the things for which we used to be able to be proud and say, hey, we are a leader in the things that are inventive and can help humanity, those are the areas where now we're laying off people. And yet the Pentagon still gets its $5 to $600 billion a year, and there's no end in sight.
Well, again, you don't even have to look at motivations to realize that, we're an entitlement nation now. The government has become the largest employer in the nation. A perfect example, and I've written about it many times before, is the post office, which is, if it's not the largest employer, I think it's the second largest employer in the entire country. And, no offense to letter carriers, they do their work, but it is a completely useless business. Not only is it losing tremendous amount of money, and the same job can be done by FedEx and UPS, but they literally are useless. I get absolute spam in the mail every day, and the government can't fire these people. Remember last year they were gonna cut off Saturdays. They can't do it, and it's the same thing with the military. They can't say, well, we're gonna have less war. Because then they would have to fire people, and there's so few full-time jobs out there, especially with Obamacare and other regulations that are making it impossible for businesses to A, start and B, maintain. So even the Microsofts of the world are firing people, and the Walmarts aren't letting people get to full-time status to get benefits. And it's going to continue like that as we become a part-time minimum wage nation because of offshoring and just generally speaking, a drain of knowledge to the east.
And, at the beginning of the conversation here, I said that you and I are just so in sync tonight. Again, I was reading your article, Is It Really Ukraine? As you were talking about the real state of the economy there, I'm looking at the national debt clock on milesfranklin.com here on your article, and it says the official debt, $17.55 trillion, and the truth, $76.6 trillion. This is a nation that is now bankrupt. The entire world knows it. And so now we see these pink elephants. We see these black swans, Ebola, the Ukraine situation and the shoot down of MH17, which I just love that you have written about here. And I want to read for folks this bit. To blame Western, quote, risk asset declines on the Ukrainian crisis is highly suspect in our view. I just love it that you see through this stuff, Andy, because in the mainstream media, they don't. You write, said pink elephant is decidedly not geopolitical tension in the Ukraine, Iraq, or the Gaza Strip, but instead the fact that expanding economic collapse threatens to swamp the powers that be's best efforts to whitewash it. These guys are pulling out all the stops, and now they've imported Ebola to our shores. Now, I don't know what that's all about. I think it's, it provides them the pretext now for an Ebola outbreak. But at the very least, it's a tremendously effective distraction from the reality of what these monsters are doing.
Yeah, well, look, you can pick the time. Some people say 2001 or 2000 when basically the global economy peaked and became debt saturated, or 2008 when the banking system broke, or what I call in an article the point of no return in mid 2011 when gold was taking off and you had the U.S. stripped of its debt rating and the European crisis and so they just went hog wild with attacking gold and propping up markets. I mean, you can pick your time, but basically it's gotten to the point where all that's left now, as this Ponzi scheme explodes in parabolic debt accumulation, is money printing, market manipulation, and propaganda. And things like the Ukraine. I mean, no sooner was the Ukraine happening. I remember we wrote an article back in March called "This is Why We Do What We Do," because of things like this. The Ukraine is a major geopolitical hotspot going back centuries, millennia. It's like the Middle East, and we said that, of course, it's going to be something that's going to be terrible and going to stay with us for a while. But it was out for a week before they were already just throwing at that term of de-escalation. Let's just say de-escalation and attack gold and silver and buy stocks and say that everything's all right. It's no different than continually saying recovery after 6 years, or just throwing out this term tapering as if it somehow means that it's great for the world and it's bad for gold. I mean, they're just making it up as they go along. Now, all of a sudden, they're going from the Ukraine being de-escalating to somehow it's a good thing because America's going to win or something. And then you throw in stuff like MH17 and Ebola. I mean, we're bringing the Ebola virus back to America. I mean, could we be that stupid? I mean, I just read The Stand by Stephen King and Inferno by Dan Brown. I mean, this is not a smart idea. But the point is, as you say, look, everything that's coming out of the powers that be, and again, I focus more on the financial side, is pure lies. I've spent hours and days and weeks writing about the bogus employment reports, what I call the island of lies, the GDP reports, the diffusion indices, the inflation reports. And again, they're becoming the laughing stock of the world right now as, again, the Ponzi scheme ends when the debt goes parabolic, and that's what it's doing right now. And it's doing it more so overseas, where countries are not the reserve currency. For instance, just look right now, the stock market falls a little, the PPT doesn't do their job and keep the stock market from never going down. And you look up, and what do you know? All those emerging market currencies where all the inflationary issues are all over the place are plunging. The British, the Brazilian real, the South African rand, the Russian ruble. This is just going to make all these issues in the Gaza Strip and the Iraq and Ukraine much worse. It's a spiral that can only get worse.
Well, there's a lot to talk about here, and it's Wednesday night as we're having this conversation. I will try very hard to get this posted as soon as I can. Most likely it will not post until Thursday night because I like to support what we're talking about with the articles that help support some of this conversation. That takes a bit of time to do. I want to talk to you about the upcoming permanent isolation of what you call the Island of Lies, U.S. economic reporting. You just were referencing that. I think it's important, though, to first talk about gold manipulation. Today we saw gold pop. Again, is it really because of Ukrainian tensions? Nobody, Andy, has proven the case for gold manipulation quantifiably, I don't think, with the exception of maybe GATA and the work they've done. And you wrote in this latest article here, Is It Really Ukraine? We can't emphasize enough that Six Sigma events like identical trading patterns cannot occur in freely traded markets. Yesterday, meaning Tuesday, for example, we showed how not only were 3 of the past 5 days' trading patterns identical, but matched the dominant algorithm of the past 20 years. It's right there for the whole world to see, Andy, and thanks to guys like you and the folks at GATA, the whole world is seeing it. The jig is up.
And actually, today's pattern in which gold was up $20, it was the exact same thing as well. And the same goes for the Dow with its dead ringer algorithms, and the same thing goes with the blatant manipulation of currencies and, of course, of interest rates by the Fed. And I won't even go into the tapering mirage and the fact that the Fed is just a chicken with its head cut off. One day it's trying to get rates down because it's surging, and now they're desperately, I call it the new Hail Mary, where they desperately are trying to push rates up because what I call the most damning proof yet of QE failure, which is plunging rates despite their so-called recovery propaganda, is not working. That's why rates are plunging to almost a new post-tapering low as we speak this evening. And as for gold manipulation, I'd say there's a debate that's going on, but there's no real debate anymore. Most people just don't care. If you're listening to Main Street media, of course, they're not going to talk about it. But, anyone in the know, particularly the people that matter, the big money, the Chinese, the Russians, heck, the Russians were at GATA's meeting in Durban, South Africa 5 or 7 years ago. They all know that what's going on. And what I wrote today in my piece, the ultimate gold manipulation primer, is just rehashing what I've been writing for 10 years. And yeah, I got my start, in this topic from GATA. I was writing with GATA in 2004 or 5, and I count them as among my best friends and the best people in the world. They've fought this fight for all this time, and as a result, it's become my life's passion, which has helped me move from Wall Street to the mining industry, and finally to where I am at Miles Franklin, where I help to educate of what's going on in the gold and silver markets. There's, anyone who says there's no manipulation either has an agenda or they're just not paying attention to reality. I mean, there's no question about it, and not to mention all the, we're having just as many lawsuits between the London Gold Fix and Silver Fix and Germany's gold, and now Bloomberg and Reuters writing about all these things. And I mean, it's not a question anymore. The only question is, when will the physical markets, the same question that GATA has asked for the past 15 years, when will the physical market swamp the paper market? And if you ask me, it's going to be the silver market where it happens first, because we've already seen major shortages in 2008, 2011, 2013. And, once this next crisis starts, which I think is going to be the big one, you're not going to be able to buy silver. Who are we kidding? You won't be able to buy gold, but silver will become more scarce than rare earth metals. And, and that's how all these games end. That's how the London Gold Pool ended. That's how the hundreds and hundreds of years worth of fiat currency central banks have lost. And they'll lose here in a more spectacular fashion than ever. And if, by the way, you don't have your gold and silver, when they do lose, it's too late. You're not getting any.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And we just spoke with Rob Kirby most recently. And as we talk about this economic shift that is happening before our very eyes, our sheeple friends don't see it. Many of our neighbors or colleagues, the American sheeple do not see it. They still don't recognize it. And many of them won't wake up until the dollar collapses. But for those who do see it and those who are paying attention, we can quantify this economic shift by looking at the development of the BRICS Bank. Let me just read you some of these headlines from SGT Report just in the past couple of weeks. As Western power diminishes, BRICS rises. BRICS Bank to rival Western banking monopoly. Here's another one. Bretton Woods cut down by the BRICS Bank. And another, BRICS in the age of financial Armageddon. Look, as Rob and I talked about, Andy, if you want to see the shift, as you talk about the paper markets being, what was the word you used? Overtaken?
Swamped.
Swamped by by the physical markets. Look east. Look at the Shanghai Futures Exchange, where they settle contracts in physical metal, and silver's being depleted very rapidly from the Shanghai Futures Exchange, as compared to the COMEX, which settles in paper. So the shift is happening, and the Wall Street powers that be in the Fed and the Wall Street powers, they can continue to manipulate the paper price all they want, but the shift is happening, and the real physical silver is being picked up, purchased, and hoarded in the East.
Well, you bring up a point that I put two charts in my one of my articles from the past week, and one of them shows, again, there's so many periods you could start with and say this is when it started, this is when it accelerated. I would simply say it just continues to go parabolic, each exponential step higher in manipulation, not just of gold but of everything. And you could pick 2008, you could pick late 2011 when everything's falling apart and all of a sudden gold gets attacked on Labor Day right after the Swiss National Bank devalues the franc. You can go to 2013 in April when Obama had a closed-door meeting with the top 10 too big to fail CEOs, and that day Goldman Sachs puts out a aggressive short sale recommendation on gold, and the next day, 2 days later, gold's down $250. You can pick whatever time as your starting point for when this happened. But the fact is, since it's happened, and particularly since last April, you have seen dramatic physical uptake from around the world. It's different in the East and the West. In the West here, we had some of our biggest demand ever right after that attack. But since then, with the prompting of the Dow and the propaganda, people have just become complacent, as you say. But in the East, we're talking about record imports into China, into India, even with the tariffs in India. They had record silver imports going forward. And as you mentioned, I put two charts into one of my articles just 2 or 3 days ago. One of them showed exactly what you're talking about. It comes from Steve St. Angelo of SRS Rocco Report, showing that the inventory on the Shanghai Silver Exchange, which, by the way, is far bigger than the COMEX as far as the amount of offtake, they have lost 90% of their silver inventory since that April attack of last year. That's equating to $20 billion worth of silver. At the same time, on the COMEX, we've seen the commercials, which is government-backed too big to fail banks like J.P. Morgan, have gone from like 5,000 contracts short to 50,000. So while you've seen 6 billion of naked shorting, and it is naked on the COMEX, you've seen 20 billion of physical offtake on the Shanghai Exchange. And by the way, we all know that last June, the COMEX, the CME, put out a disclaimer on all of its COT data saying we disclaim that this may not be true. We have no idea if this data is true.
Right.
And just this past week, we saw that the CFTC themselves actually fined JP Morgan for repeatedly giving out false data, COT data. So it's confirmed what we've been saying all along. Everything that they say is false in the paper realm. It's exactly what I'm referring to in the island of lies, where the only place on the planet where any, quote, positive economic data comes out is in the U.S. labor market, the big #1 political tool, and these diffusion indices, which I have completely and utterly debunked across the board. In fact, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs say that they're useless. And again, the isolation of the island of lies is what I'm talking about. It won't be long before no one believes anything financial that comes out of the United States, anything at all.
Well, and the only people, you know that old saying, Andy, if you don't know who the fool is at the poker table, it's you. That's a great metaphor for the American people, for the sheeple people, because they're the only ones that are still going to believe this thing as it comes. Well, it is crashing down. And they really are the only ones that believe it, right?
Yeah.
If you take a look at the world economies, what are the top 3 economies on the planet? Well, I guess, did China overtake us? Is it China, the United States, and then Japan?
No, we're still first, and China just overtook Japan. But Japan is in free fall. But then again, China is on the verge of free fall right now. Everyone is. But, we're still #1. But again, we and China just rejiggered our GDP calculation to say, voila, our GDP is bigger. We're going to count goodwill from acquisitions as an asset. We're going to count research and development, whether it produces anything as an asset. Nigeria just did the same thing, and voila, they're the biggest economy in Africa.
Right.
I think Spain and Portugal just did it. China just did it. And, again, these numbers are just lies. They're basically doing it so they could say, well, look, our debt to GDP is lower than you thought it was. But it's not. This is what I mean by the island of lies, and it's not just in the States. You can't make up for the fact that cash flow is not coming in by saying that it's coming in, and it's crashing everywhere. Japan, I don't even want to go in. Japan is such a basket case that, I truly believe that Japan will be the first major economy
to hit hyperinflation.
Absolutely.
You've been saying that for several months now, and I just continue to go on the record because when it happens, I want everybody to give you the credit because you have been saying that, and I continue to bring it up. But what I was driving at about the sheeple people buying the propaganda coming out of this criminal government is that, and you wrote in your article here, is the fact that Fed money printing has created history's largest financial bubble in essentially all risk assets, but particularly equities. You write, no chart in my lifetime is more ominous than this one. Can you tell people about that chart, and I'll show it as you describe what you're talking about?
Absolutely. Look, when it comes to technical analysis, look, I'm a classically trained Wall Street analyst. I'm a CFA. I worked 15 years on Wall Street. I was an award-winning analyst, buy side, sell side. I know how technical and fundamental analysis work. And I've disclaimed both of them. They no longer work at all. And the shorter distance you're talking about it, whether it's 1 year or 1 month, the less time you're talking about, the less that they work. However, when you talk about manipulated markets, it's impossible to manipulate ultra long-term markets. In fact, what I found over the years, just by looking at charts, is the more like the gold cartel suppresses gold and silver, the bigger the long-term floors they create, such as just look at silver at the floor that they've created by multiple times trying to crash it. And now this 1850 to 19 level is like a rock solid level that in a billion years is not going to be broken. It's their fault that they've created it. But what the chart that you're talking about is ultra, ultra long. I mean, these amazing analysts who have access to data that goes back, from the 1970s have charts that show that not only is gold and silver way more oversold than at any time in history, and I say history meaning since 1971 when we went off the gold standard, and I mean way more oversold and on the verge of massively breaking up. But the stock market, okay, little background, and you know it too, when I was a Wall Street analyst in 1999, 2000, I didn't think anything could approach the mania that was up there. I was an oil field service analyst, and our bankers were making us work on oil field internet companies. That was my entire life. It was the most notoriety I ever got in my life. It was that crazy. But now, without any retail participation in this bull market, because of the Fed's money printing and what they've created in the hot money, the S&P 500 is now way more overbought than at the top of the 2000 market. And it's not just the technicals. We're talking about margin debt. We're talking about the level of just speculation in general, leverage. And so, when I say is it really Ukraine? Of course it's not Ukraine. Ukraine is nothing new. It's horrible. It could be World War III. But believe me, the markets are not going down this past week because of the Ukraine. They're going down because they are so massively overbought in the worst fundamentals of all time. And conversely, gold and silver have never been more oversold technically or fundamentally in the history of mankind, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, especially when you take a look at John Williams and Shadow Stats, the real amount of money that's been printed, even just since 2008. Now, as we talk about this meltdown, as you describe it, that's occurring, and the real reason for the meltdown, this interview that Jim Willey did with Wall Street for Main Street recently here, he's talking about the 1.4 quadrillion in derivatives, which you and I have talked about. He calls them a fraud-driven toxic illusion due to evaporate with the U.S. dollar. The powers that be have their hands tied because they cannot get out of these derivatives. Any bank that tries to get out of their position will crash all the other positions, and it's an absolute Ponzi scheme coming down on top of itself. And he says your deposits are unsecured credit. Get your money out of the banks, out of stocks, out of bonds, get into gold and silver. That seems to be a message for those of us who are awake, Andy, that resonates. That's not hyperbole, right? This is the same research Bix Weir has been doing. I talk to him frequently. I talk to Rob Kirby frequently. I talk to you frequently. I talk to smart people. I've spoken with Peter Schiff. I've spoken with Mike Maloney. This is a theme that is shared by all of us individually, right? Independent critical thinkers are all coming to the same conclusion.
And that's the scary thing about derivatives. Well, just like everything else, just like the debt that's whitewashed, the fraudulent corporate accounting that's whitewashed, the fact that the entire growth in the S&P 500 has been due to stock buybacks financed by zero-cost debt. I mean, all this stuff's been whitewashed, but derivatives are the scariest of all because, aside from the FASB changing all the accounting rules back in 2009 and letting banks basically value anything they want at whatever they want. They've changed the they changed the definition of derivatives to make it look smaller. But more importantly, they've taken what was once off balance sheet in Enron-esque fashion and made it even more off balance sheet. I mean, you talked about the U.S. debt at 17 trillion and the real debt 70 trillion. Even those numbers are comical compared to the real reality. I mean, heck, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have $5 trillion of debt, and they don't even count. They're considered off-balance sheet items. And I've seen numbers for unfunded liabilities of $200 trillion. So the fact is, these derivatives haven't gone away. And when it comes to AIG or General Motors through GMAC or Goldman Sachs, the government just took them and put them onto their own balance sheet. So if the Fed says it's got $4.5 trillion on its balance sheet, it probably has $4.5 quadrillion on its balance sheet. All these things are real. And when you see stuff like Banco Espirito Santo go under or the government of Argentina go under, trust me, there's plenty of money being printed behind the scenes to pay off those derivatives, which will eventually show up in inflation just like everything else.
And, as we're having this conversation and we're talking about these trillions in debt, right? If the official number is $17.5 trillion of U.S. debt, but the real number is 70 trillion plus, by some accounts, I think Lawrence Kotlikoff would argue that it's 202 trillion, and that was a couple of years ago. Again, I want to circle back because we broke this when Bloomberg wrote the story because I couldn't believe it that it was put in writing, and then the same author wrote about it again a week later. According to Bloomberg, the annual silver market is $5 trillion. Can you even begin to put that in perspective, Andy? The paper fraud and the derivatives fraud we must be dealing with, if the total national debt of this country, imagine the amounts of money that is printed and spent by just the Pentagon alone. If the national debt of this nation is $17 trillion, a $5 trillion annual silver market, I think that dwarfs Germany's GDP. I mean, it's insane.
Again, when you're talking about silver, it may be a $5 trillion market, but the fact is 3/4 plus of that is vacuumed up for industrial purposes. And I'm not talking about housing like copper. I'm talking about vital purposes that have almost no economic sensitivity at all. And it's always been that way. Remember, we were talking about a few years back, there's no more photography, so it's going to drop it. Well, industrial silver demand is dramatically higher without the photography because of all the other usages, and those usages are not going to change, I assure you, unless people stop using cell phones and they stop using solar power and they stop trying to get healthy. No, silver industrial demand is as stable as it's going to be, and it takes up more than 3/4 of all the production in the world. But if you talk about after all that, what's left over, it's just a tiny smidgen. It's just a day or two of Fed money printing. And the amount of above ground inventories, above ground meaning someone still owns them and are holding them for some reason, has been estimated at the high end to be $2 billion. I mean, yeah, there's some relics in museums and churches, but if you talk about the actual above ground amount, you're talking about my silver, your silver, silver that is held by the government of China. It ain't going anywhere. So there's so little amount of it. That's why we almost ran out in 2008, 2011, 2013. And that's why the cartel is so desperate to push it down because they know how fast it can run out. The problem is by pushing it down below the cost of production. And yes, production has plummeted. U.S. and Canadian production alone are down 50 or 60% in the last decade. And they're not coming back because of it. The sustainable price for silver not just for the best minds in the world producing now. The sustainable price for the silver industry is about $30 an ounce. There's no doubt in my mind. Just like the gold is 1,500 plus. The CEO of Goldfields, the fifth largest producer in the world, said that last year. And that's why production is plummeting. And when it comes to gold, at least some of that stuff is everything that's been produced is still there. Most of the silver is gone. So there's no doubt in my mind that silver is going to be where the bottleneck starts. And for all we know, that bottleneck starts in the next few months. Will Jim Sinclair be right that it is the next few months? I don't know. But even if he's not, it's going to be pretty close. And I can tell you, if he is, we're talking about some major S hitting the fan by the end of the year.
Yeah, and I just want to leave people with this, too. As we talk about paper silver versus physical silver, I think it gets real easy for those of us that have been accumulating physical for any period of time to get a little burnt out by this story because the powers that be have been winning the battle, right, psychologically. They're actually losing the battle by allowing us to use our fiat money. Our fiat money should not be able to buy silver at 20 an ounce. If this were an honest system that were crashing like Argentina's system, the $100 an ounce mark would have been passed long time ago, right, Andy?
Absolutely. Well, look, I wrote an article just 2 or 3 days ago called "The Most Resolute Gold Bulls," and the reason that I wrote it was there's a technical analyst named Bo Polney. I don't really know him. I don't have an opinion either way. I know Jim Sinclair respects him. I think that's how he's got on the scene. He made a call in June. Okay, the price was $13.15 per ounce. And he said, I expect gold to have a big drop this summer, followed by a moonshot, quote, moonshot to 2,000 by year end. And what he said was, well, don't worry, the 1180 low from last year will hold. I don't know where to go, but that'll hold. But only the most resolute bulls will be able to survive this. And again, you talked about the difference between owning physical versus paper. I'm not sure why, after all these years of owning physical gold and silver, in our case, most of it sitting in our Brinks vault in Montreal, probably never to be touched ever again, why I need to be resolute about worrying that the worst case scenario is gold may fall 6% in the next few months before a moonshot. When you own paper PM investments, as I call them, which goes from everything from closed-end funds to open-end funds to mining share certificates, well, yeah, there's a lot of scary things out there. You look at your brokerage account and you go, holy cow, I lost $50,000. Will that money come back? Who knows? But when I see gold go down $50 in a day or a week, I go, so what? My ounces are the same as they used to be. And eventually everyone will think in terms of their ounces. I don't need to be resolute at all. First of all, I know the economics. I know, as I wrote in, that other reason to own precious metals, there's no way that they could push the price down significantly from here because there would be no mining business. I will just sit and wait comfortably and not need any resolve at all because I know in time, probably much sooner than people think, my ounces will be worth a lot more dollars and yen and euros. It's that simple.
Yeah, that's right. And my point that I was trying to make, and I didn't do it very eloquently because I didn't finish there, was that physical silver is a lot harder to produce than paper silver. And I know they've been winning the battle psychologically over the past 3 years, but watch this video we posted at SGT Report. It's from the show Modern Marvels. It appeared on the History Channel, and it's called Silver Mines. If you want to appreciate the silver in your safe or in your Brinks vault, watch this thing and imagine how exhausting and nightmarish it is to try to mine physical silver from the ground. It is virtually impossible.
And yes, I do agree. One thing I do agree with him, but not the way he meant it was, you certainly have needed to be resolute to put up mentally with what we've dealt with for the last, let's call it 3 years, or particularly the last year, where you have to listen every day about tapering and recovery and de-escalation and gold smashes and everything is great, when the fact is, you know that you've been completely right all along. That's all. Frustrating, but if you have your money in physical gold, silver, and it's money that you don't need to sell, I mean, I would never tell someone to buy gold knowing you needed that money like a month from now. But if it's just your savings, the way you used to think of your money in the bank that you're never going to touch, no resolve needed at all. Just sit and relax. Yeah. And wait it out, and you'll be right as you've been for the last 15 years, and then some.
That's right, and you're spiritually right, too. I've often said, and I'll continue to say, the libertarian, the pro-humanity thing to do is to divest from this debt-based, death-based Ponzi system. My friend Chris Duane likes to call it the debt-based death model, and divest out of their paper fiat, invest into precious metals in your own possession, make yourself a sovereign financially, and get out of this criminal system. Because I just want to sum up by, again, just reminding people what's happening as we look to the east, right? Let's compare the BRICS to the United States, UK, and Israel, right? As we compare what's happening here, we've got the BRICS, we've got China, Russia, India, Brazil, possibly, according to Jim Willey, Germany's thinking about joining the BRICS. What do we see with the BRICS?
Yeah.
We see the biggest infrastructure project in human history, as you noted at the beginning of the interview. We see them settling in physical metals. What do we see from the US, UK, and Israel? We see conflict. We see false flags. We see paper settlement. We see a debt-based Ponzi collapsing. We see war. And ultimately, my biggest fear of all, Andy, is that this cornered mad dog, which is not the BRICS, it's this other side, may end up taking us into a thermonuclear war. And that's my biggest fear, because they are truly behaving like a cornered dog.
Yeah. Well, again, when I'll just finish with saying, you can't say the BRICS in general. I mean, yes, there's a global movement away from the US dollar, and more countries are driving it. But again, some of these BRICS are in dire situations themselves. I mean, India is a basket case. Brazil is beyond a basket case. And South Africa, I can't even comprehend. I mean, hopefully higher gold prices will save them. But generally speaking, what you're talking about is the trend of more and more people and more money joining up to become the dominant powers in the world. It's a West versus East thing. It's clearly a West versus East thing, as in Western Europe and the United States against everyone else. And even Western Europe is starting to abandon the United States because of its horribly destructive foreign policy, monetary policy, you name it. And so, there's going to be a horrible transition period between now and when the BRICS are in charge. It's not like they're just going to have good times. But when all is said and done, it's going to be the Eastern Hemisphere where the financial power, the military power most likely, and of course the political power is going to be based at. And if you refuse to heed the blatant, blaring warnings of this, you're going to be one of the 99%, or at best 98%, who are left potentially broke.
Well, Andy, you are one of the people we trust. That's why we have you on every single month. I know the folks at Miles Franklin are also honorable, and they can be trusted. So for any of the listeners that want to take action and get physical silver and or gold in their own possession, and let's say they want to do it through you guys, why don't you give us a phone number and tell them who to call?
It's that simple. Miles Franklin Precious Metals. We are in our 25th year in business, which is quite an accomplishment in this unregulated, difficult business. We're honest. Our brokers have nearly 20 years experience each. We're competitively priced, and we will give you first-class service. Just call us 800-822-8080. We have a free blog every single day, comprised by myself, Bill Holter, and David Checkman. And of course, you can always email me at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com.
All right, guys, our guest has been Andy Hoffman, the media director over at Miles Franklin, milesfranklin.com. Andy, as always, thanks for your time, and let's get together in 4 weeks instead of 6 this time. And, unless another one of these pink elephants blows up or another black swan is presented, if something dire happens, let's talk sooner.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
All right. Have a good one. Guys, thanks for watching, and thanks for checking us out. We do appreciate your support at SGT Report. Leave your comments below. We appreciate them very much. We really value the community that's building there, and we value each and every one of you. Thanks for listening.